This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go beyond the big screen.
Hello, and welcome back to Beyond the Big Screen, where we'll be just dissecting the 2001 science fiction film AI, written and directed by Steven Spielberg. On today's show, we're going to be having a very special guest, John David Ebert. And John, why don't you just take a second and introduce yourself to the audience?
I'm John David Ebert. I'm a cultural critic and a philosopher and a literary writer. So I've got all kinds of different books, poetry, metaphysics, cultural criticism, all kinds of stuff. I just have resisted academia, and I decided after I got a BA in English at about age 21, I decided that no more academia for me because I knew it would be stultifying and I knew it would limit my horizons. And I wanted the big picture because I had already discovered Oswald Spengler's Decline of the West in college, and I wanted to learn what he learned. I wanted to see the big picture of civilization, how all the arts and political machinery and everything fits together, and the metaphysics and the mythology and so forth. So I started from kind of a background in Jungian mythology with Joseph Campbell and so forth. I worked for the Joseph Campbell Foundation after his death. I worked there for about 5 years as an editor. So that's kind of where I started, but then I started kind of out in the New Age, and then I got disillusioned with it after I did my first book, Twilight of the Clockwork God. That was published in 1999. I got disillusioned with its anti-intellectualism. These are not people who read philosophy. They don't read Kant, Goethe, and Nietzsche and Spengler. And I was much more interested in them than in New Age mythology and spirituality. So I left that and then spent the next decade working on philosophy and cultural criticism, metabolizing French postmodern thought and so forth, and then writing books of cultural criticism. And now in a weird way, I've sort of come back to the New Age a bit in my later career. You might say my spirituality is pretty consistent with the New Age. I think with the New Age, they've got the spirituality and the cosmology correct. It's basically correct. The problem is the kitsch. The problem is the Shirley MacLaines and the kitschy people who degrade it and make it vulgar. It's very anti-intellectual and very embarrassing culturally. There's no cultural sophistication to the New Age whatsoever. So that's what's missing from the New Age, just as the spirituality is what's missing from the scientific academic world. So that's kind of sort of where I am in between these worlds.
Yeah, I got introduced to your stuff because I was just on a lark. I somehow stumbled across Oswald Spengler, and I read his Wikipedia page, and then I started reading the book, and I was just blown away. I was like, this is almost kind of like a religious type moment in terms of viewing history and philosophy. And it's like, I need to understand this guy better, and I'm not intelligent enough to do it by myself. So I went searching on YouTube to find videos that would help explain it. And I stumbled across your series that you had done chapter by chapter on Oswald Spengler. And then I've just kind of been following you ever since. And the reason I asked you to come on here is because for somebody who's, an intellectual, somebody who's highbrow philosophy, you have the way you look at film and the way you are able to break down film. Like you have several books, right, that just break film scene by scene, lecture series. You've written tons of reviews. You don't look down on film. You actually see film as this is art, like in the sense of we look at a Rembrandt or we look at the Mona Lisa. This is just a continuation of that same kind of art. It's changed, obviously, because the technology's changed and thus the art has changed.
It is a popular art it's also highbrow. I mean, it's difficult to think of The Godfather as anything but a recapturing of Shakespeare combined with Rembrandt, visually combined with Rembrandt. So it's a high work of art. Apocalypse Now, same thing. It's a masterpiece that retrieves the Odyssey and the epic tradition and also the apocalyptic tradition, the Jewish apocalyptic tradition as well, as does 2001: A Space Odyssey. It retrieves the Jewish apocalypse of taking an individual such as Enoch, which first appears about 160 BC is when the apocalyptic books start getting going in the Middle East with the Jews, with the book of Daniel and with one Enoch, where he is taken up on a tour through the heavens by angel beings who take him on a tour, and he sees the whole machinery. Same thing goes on at the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey. So it's retrieving the apocalypse. So yeah, I do take the film seriously because I think that they really are like contemporary dreams in the sense that when you dream, the dream is telling you what's going on in your life right now, where the problems are, where the good stuff is, where the gold is at, what you're forgetting, what you're overlooking. And our public dreams are our movies, and they do that for us. They're public dreams. And when I wrote my first book on film. It was my second book published, 2005, Celluloid Heroes and Mechanical Dragons. I took that hypothesis and I said, well, it looks like we're having nightmares about our machines here, starting with 2001 at least, maybe a little bit before that, but 2001 made it acute. And that theme of the battle with the machine, Dave's battle with HAL 9000 gets reiterated in the Terminator films, in The Phantom Menace. You have armies of robots with homicidal intentions to wipe human beings out. So we're not consciously, we think our machines are great. We get up, we go to our work, we do work on computers. They do all these wonderful things for us. But our collective unconscious is not so comfortable with them. It's not so comfortable with the rate of pace of change that it inflicts on us that we're constantly having to catch up. And the psyche takes a while to metabolize that information and transform it. And it transforms it into these mythological dream images, like, for instance, AI that we're about to discuss here.
Yeah, I've often felt like that myself, is to get a kind of to see in what's actually going on spiritually in a society and even intellectually. The first people to really talk about it are the artists, right? And the vast majority of people that consume film is pop art. It was television too now, and video games to a lesser degree. And you brought up like people's anxiety about machines, and you brought up all those movies, and those movies, in a lot of ways, the reasons why we look back on them with such fondness is they were way ahead of their time. And we're going to get into this movie AI in just a little bit, and I would argue that this film really captured into way more so than those other movies that you talked about in terms of man's anxiety about AI. I don't know, people are talking about it now, but people forget this movie came out in 2001. And just now, you hear people like Elon Musk talking about, I believe it's like Neuralink, or do you know what I'm talking about? That link that's like literally you're hooked up to a computer. I think the first guy in the world just got hooked up
chip
to it.
Planted in your brain or something like that. It sounds very spurious. I'm very suspicious of that kind of technology.
Well, trust me, so am I. But this is one of the reasons why I think this movie is so brilliant. And well, let's get into a little bit of like kind of the background of this film a little bit. Initially, this was supposed to be Stanley Kubrick. Actually, Stanley Kubrick was actually supposed to do this movie. He was actually it was kind of like a passion project for him, and he initially kind of got the idea for it from this short story called "All Super Toys All Summer Long." I haven't read the story myself. Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't. Have you read the story yourself?
Yeah, it's just a little short sketch that features the David and the Teddy, and that's about it. So that's really just a seed that Kubrick then just amplified and expanded by bringing the Pinocchio story in and fusing it together with it. And also the Wizard of Oz. It's sort of a fusion of those things.
Yeah, you touched on this on one of your books too, in the sense of film shouldn't even bother trying to like recreate like the classics. Like, don't bother trying to recreate Dante. Don't bother trying to recreate Paradise Lost. It's already been perfected in their art form. What film can do, though, is take these kind of lesser known short stories and perfect them.
Yeah, that was Kubrick's instinct all along. Most of the movies that he has made are based on novels. But if you go back and read the novels, they're usually, with the possible exception of Lolita, they're usually not as good as the films. Even a classic novel like Barry Lyndon, I went back and reread that by Thackeray, and it's nowhere near as good as the movie. Every change Kubrick made to that novel was much better. So, and crappy novels like The Shining, it's not a very good novel. It's fun. It's a fun story, but it's very badly written. It was written in a drunken alcoholic stupor, and you can tell that it's very sloppy. Coppola does the same thing with The Godfather, and Spielberg with Jaws. These are trashy novels that would have been forgotten about. They're Walgreens bestsellers, but these guys came along and they saw potential in each of these narratives, and they extracted it at a moment when film was attaining the apogee of its possibilities as a medium. So it was ready for masterpieces. It was ready to make the best films ever made. And so that's how it worked. Yeah, if you apotheosize a work like Dante did or Paradise Lost, you can't improve upon those works. But you can improve upon pop short stories and novels, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I don't know, kind of sat in production hell, for lack of a better word, for like a really, really, really long time. And there was, by the mid-'80s, Kubrick came to the conclusion that this probably wasn't going to be the best film for him to direct. And he actually approached Steven Spielberg at one point, and apparently it did get some legs for a bit, and then Kubrick decided that just the technology just hasn't reached that part yet, like to be able to do this movie justice. And so it sat. They did nothing with it for a little while. Then Kubrick saw Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park, and he saw the potential for the mixture of CGI and practical effects. And he goes, "Okay, yeah, now like we're ready to make the movie." Then nothing happened with it for a long time, and then Kubrick ended up directing Eyes Wide Shut, which unfortunately turned out to be his last movie before he passed away. And then later, Kubrick's wife, Christina, would actually approach Steven Spielberg to direct the film, and he accepted and was working on other projects at the time too. So he didn't put 2 feet into it yet, but then by, I believe it was 1999, was full on board and directed this one. And I believe Minority Report came out shortly after. There was that span there where it seemed like every year there was a new Steven Spielberg film coming out, and some of them weren't the greatest.
That was his Sunset Effect. He had that run with AI, Minority Report, War of the Worlds, and Munich, and then after that, it's just downhill filmmaker. It's been very sad to watch him decline as a filmmaker. He does now, though, have possession of Stanley Kubrick's screenplay for Napoleon, which Kubrick was not able to film, and he's intending to do like a Netflix series based on it. So maybe he'll redeem himself a bit with that, with the help of Kubrick's screenplay, sort of like what he's done here with AI. It's all Kubrick, and Spielberg is just going and filling in the dialogue for, because Kubrick had this idea that for a screenplay, you have to have 4 non-submersible elements, 4 sections that you know are going to be good, and then you hire a screenwriter to come in and connect them together and fill in all the dialogue, because Kubrick wasn't so good with actual screenwriting. And Spielberg wasn't either. This is one of the rare cases, like with Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where he wrote his own screenplay. But he had so many conversations with Kubrick about the film that he knew exactly what Kubrick wanted. So he's writing it to accord with Kubrick's idea.
Steve here. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Richard Lim's This American President and other great shows. Go to parthenonpodcast.com to learn more, and here is a quick word from our sponsors.
Yeah, it's interesting when you contrast the two, because in a lot of ways they're polar opposite as filmmakers, where like Spielberg gets accused of too much sentimentality and Kubrick gets accused of coldness in his films. And those are 2 rightful criticisms, right? With Spielberg in some of his films, I wouldn't say this film, some of his films, the sentimentality, it's very heavy, right? And then in Kubrick's films, you can watch some of his films. 2001: A Space Odyssey is probably a good example of this, where, I mean, I've watched that entire film, and I'm not drawing a blank. I've watched that entire film many times, and I'm drawing a blank on the main character's name because it's kind of irrelevant. Like, the guy's name doesn't really matter.
Right. No, it doesn't. It's not. The characters of the film aren't that important. What's important is that the human species is the subject of the entire film, rather than these particular individual characters. It's a very original screenplay in that sense. Very original.
Yeah. So to kind of break down AI, I think AI kind of breaks up into 3 acts. When you watch the film, there's the first act. David is created, and then he comes home and he spends some time with Monica. Her actual son kind of returns, and then then David leaves. He's out in the wild for a bit. He goes on his journey, right? And then he finds his answer, but kind of doesn't find his answer. And then that's kind of the third act. So the 22nd century, rising sea levels from global warming have wiped out 99% of the existing cities, reducing the world's population. Mecha humanoid robots, seemingly capable of complex thought, but lacking emotions, have been created as replacements. And I assume try to help rebuild after the wreckage. In Madison, New Jersey, David, a prototype mecha child capable of experiencing love, is given to Harry Swinton and his wife Monica, whose son Martin contracted a rare disease and has been placed in suspended animation. Initially uncomfortable with David, Monica eventually warms up to him, activates his imprinting protocol, seeking to have her love him in return. He also befriends Teddy, Martin's old robotic teddy bear, and this is kind of where Spielberg's sentimentality gets into in a little bit, but I love that teddy bear. After Martin is unexpectedly cured of his disease and brought home, he jealously goads David into cutting off a piece of Monica's hair with a pair of scissors. David does so that night when he enters his adoptive parents' room, but Monica turns and is poked in the eye by the scissors. As Henry tends to his wounds, Teddy picks up a lock of the hair from the floor and places in his pocket. During a pool party, one of Martin's friends pokes David with a knife, triggering his self-protection program. He grabs onto Martin, causing them to both fall into the pool and sink to the bottom. David, not having to breathe because he is a robot, doesn't realize that Martin is going to drown if he doesn't let him go, which causes basically everyone to turn on David. Not so much Monica, but mainly Henry and Martin, and I assume the social pressure from around the neighborhood.
Yeah, that's right. And there's, by that point, she knows something has to be done, so she gets rid of him. That's the infant abandonment motif that you find all through mythology and Grimm's fairy tales. Grimm's fairy tales especially. The scene in the forest reminds me of very often you'll get parents leading kids out into the forest and then they'll leave them there and abandon them. So it's a very old motif.
Yeah. Well, I mean, right off the bat, like people probably, I don't know, global warming is such a hot button issue. Like how much of it is man-made, how much of it is not man-made. It's like, to me, it's irrelevant, right? Like something catastrophic has happened and has essentially pretty much wiped out the human race. And the human race's reaction to this was to create these artificial intelligent robots to basically help them survive, because there just wasn't enough human beings left to be able to function to be able to run a complex society. That's the way I interpreted it.
That's right. The global warming, though, is real. And I believe that it is man-made. I studied it for my book, The Age of Catastrophe. It is man-made. And we cannot have an ice age, according to these experts, for at least 10,000 more years, based on the amount of CO2 that's in the air, because there's so much of it. It would take that long to process. So this sets 2,000 years into the future. It sets it in an ice age. But it doesn't matter, because what matters about that are a couple of things. Number one, the number 2,000. It takes about 2,000 years, 2160 to be precise, for the precession of the equinoxes to go back through a zodiacal sign. So every 2,160 years, from right now, it's precessing back from Pisces into Aquarius. It's got another century or two to go before it's completely finished with Pisces. So it refers to that. It refers to one spoke of the 12 spokes of the great Magnus Annus, what it's called the Great Year, the Platonic Year, which adds up to 25,920 years for a complete precession going all the way around. So it's got these cycles, but with the reference to the Ice Age, it also has a reference to geological cycles. Now, ice ages have only been going on for about 2 to 3 million years of the Earth's history. The first one happened 2 billion years ago, but it was the result of bacteria, their excretions, bringing down a major ice age. And that first ice age, which was created by bacteria 2 billion years ago, was so thorough that the Earth was entirely encompassed in ice, which I don't think has ever been in our ice ages in the past 2 or 3 million years, but it was complete. And the only thing that melted it were active volcanoes. The volcanoes had to activate in order to melt it and thaw it out. And then new life comes. You get the Cambrian explosion with the first life forms after that. That's 520 million years ago. So he wants you to think of these geological cycles, because what happens with respect to ice ages, every time one happens, it's like the Earth takes a vacation and it wants to cool herself. Gaia wants to cool herself off. And a new species of Homo mutates. During every one of these ice ages, you get a new species of Homo erectus. Well, Homo habilis, then Homo erectus. Then all these different Homo ergaster, they've found a bunch of new ones that they've added in. And it usually happens during an ice age. So Kubrick wants you to think of that as well, that there may have been a new mutation during this ice age, this dark age, and the mutation happened from the robots this time, not humans. Whereas the humans dropped out, they went extinct, and now you have these super robots.
Yeah, and I think what they're trying to, I think the human species already kind of knows that it's over, right? And they're creating these robots to kind of just prolong time. But eventually, I think in the back of their head, maybe the more intelligent people of the society know they're kind of sowing the seeds of their own destruction. Because in a lot of ways, these robots are superior beings than human beings in some ways. And that kind of gets into the next point where, we cut to a shot and the corporation has created this, or at least at this point, they're discussing about creating a mecha, an AI intelligence that is capable of love for initially, I guess, people who are unable to have kids, or maybe there's some regulations about population control because of resource management. And that's my guess. And they end up creating this mecha that is capable of love. And I think this is Spielberg and Kubrick commenting on that eventually, human beings at that point, once you create David, you kind of become God. And I was thinking about this during the week, and I've been thinking about this actually a lot the last couple of years with all this talk about AI. And I've come to the conclusion that maybe that's the whole purpose of any higher organism on this planet, or, any numerous planets that have organisms on it, is eventually you end up creating something that's better than you that will end up replacing you. Does that make sense in your kind of all the philosophical reading that you've done, John?
On one level, you can read the creation of the robots as a metaphor for genetic engineering, because it's going to end up with the same semiotics and the same idea. Plus, that's closer to the Frankenstein myth that the whole thing is based on anyway, in the first place. Professor Hobby is Dr. Frankenstein. Because genetic engineering is going to be a big deal for us. There will come a point where humans will be cloned. It's absolutely 100% inevitable. It may be another century off, but they're cloning monkeys. I've been reading about this, and the monkeys have behavioral issues. So they have a lot of problems. There are a lot of the success rate for clones of animals is very, very low. Very often they'll have to abort it. Something will go wrong. The original clone Dolly became morbidly obese. So this is that's what's going on here. That's what all of this idea is about. And the part of patriarchal big institution science to master genetic engineering to steal the procreative force away from the mother. Guys, that's what's going on in the Frankenstein myth. And insofar as AI partakes of the Frankenstein myth, it's also partaking in that myth.
Well, it's interesting you bring up like Frankenstein, because romanticism as like a movement in general was a reaction to what they saw with the technology being introduced into their society, and science and analytical thinking and Enlightenment thinking to a degree, right? Like the cynical fact man type of thinking that started getting introduced into their society. I mean, AI fits, in my opinion, fits right in that tradition, right? Like here you have like the hubris of man being, I'm going to create a boy robot that's capable of love, and I'm going to give it to parents that, I don't know, either have lost a child or unable to have a child. And this robot is just going to be as much of a child as a biological child. It's the hubris. It's just so off the charts. Like the guy that creates him, does he even stop to think like what am I even doing here? Like, do we have to do this? Is this really necessary that we're going to create robots that feel love? Why?
Yeah, it's just life force, the patriarchal takeover of the life force. You can think about artificial intelligence in connection with this film, but you can also think about, as I say, genetic engineering, because it's the same story either way, creating machines that are autonomous. Now, David, if you remember the scene in the Fleshfare, and when they go into that cage, when David goes into that cage, notice that every robot in that cage has been designed for a special task, and one task only. The maid, her job is to be a nanny. So she raises the woman with the half of face. There's a guy with a television thing that he does, whatever it is he does. They're all specialized. David is the first one to be a generalized robot. That is to say, he's just created for the purpose of love, for receiving love from humans and giving it back to them. That's the anomaly there. That's the total singularity that the film is about. What happens if we can do that? We'll certainly be able to do it with genetic engineering. That's not going to be a problem. But it is going to cause a problem. You can imagine the racial issues that fake humans, cloned people will be regarded as fake humans. They won't be as human as us. Therefore, a mythology could come along that supports mistreating them, treating them as slaves, for instance. When you deontologize someone and you take them out of the category of human and you put them into a less than human category, now you can kill them with impunity. This is the law of what Giorgio Agamben calls homo sacer. The rights of the state have been withdrawn from such an individual because the rights of the state have been created for humans and humans only. So if you're not in the human category, anything can be done to you with impunity, including slavery, genocide, and so forth. These are the kinds of things that will happen when genetic engineering gets going with the production of human clones. You can bet on it's going to be a big issue.
100%. And I mean, when we get into the Fleshfare, we'll discuss some of the takes that I have on it, which but we're not quite there yet, but we're not too far away. I mean, so Monica and her husband are kind of like the test subjects for this new robot, David, right? Like we pointed out, like I pointed out in the intro, Martin, he has some rare disease. He's in suspended animation until I guess they can find a cure for him. So basically they're kind of replacing their child with this robot that can love, and they're just going to kind of see how it goes. I mean, initially Monica does not like the idea at all. It was actually her husband's idea. But then eventually she kind of acquiesced, and at first the relationship between them is kind of awkward. But I mean, to be honest with you, for the audience members, that first kid that you have, and you're like kind of learning about each other at the same time, right? Like I remember when my daughter, like my first daughter, like it was a little bit different with my son, but my first daughter, it's like, okay, I'm a father now and I have this baby here. And like, I don't know how to react in certain situations. Like I know how to feed them and do all of that. Right.
One child, I have a son. So I know what it's like raising them, but I've noticed too that like in my own family, for instance, every time a new child is added, it changes the dynamic of the entire family. The way that they relate to each other once you add another child in changes the dynamic. It's very different. So too here in the film, once you add David in, it disturbs the family dynamic with the other kid who's hidden. Now, the fact that the other kid is in like suspended animation activates a myth archetype of the twins. And these are in medieval mythology, this is the Oak King and the Holly King. And the Oak King comes in, he's at full power during the summer solstice. But because Oak is deciduous, it dies and revives. He has to die and be replaced by the Holly King. Holly is an evergreen. So it represents the eternal principle. And so it regains its power during the autumn equinox. And by the time it gets to the winter equinox, it's at its full power. And then the Holly King has to be slain and replaced by the Oak King. So these two brothers are enacting this same myth. The one is in the underworld, as it were, while David represents one or the other of those, maybe the Oak King, perhaps, or maybe it's the kid who's in a symbolic death mode. That's the Oak King. He's slumbering underneath the soil from winter solstice to summer solstice, while the Holly King is in play here. He's the one in play. He's active. We're not given a specific time frame, but you could imagine it as 6 months of activity within this family. Before then, he is replaced by the other twin who comes in and knocks him out. There goes the Holly King, and now the Oak King comes in from June solstice to winter solstice, which is the period of his power. So that's also buried. That's also a myth archetype that's buried in the narrative in a very clever way, I think.
Well, what's your opinion? Do you think Monica ends up imprinting, doing his imprint on the robot, which they discuss in the movie? It's like, up until that point is kind of like his relationship to the mother is kind of up in the air. But once the imprint is done, like she willingly makes that decision, then there's no turning back. Do you think she loved David?
Yeah, I think she did. And that too is the myth of the golem, because the Hebrew golem is an artificial figure made out of clay that is animated by inscribing Hebrew letters onto its chest. And so that's the same. Kubrick is consciously working in the Jewish myth of the golem. Yeah, so there is that, and that's what activates him and imprints forever this goddess mother image into his psyche. And it is very analogous to the human relation to a favored deity, like the cult of the Virgin Mary, let's say, something like that, or the cult of the goddess Isis, which is behind the Mary archetype with the Christ child on her lap. That was originally Isis with Horus on her lap. The Christians took that over. And so that archetype gets activated here, the mother archetype and the son archetype. And the son is the dying and reviving God. So he has to go through the underworld and then come back out of it and to be reunited with the mother at the end, even though it's a fake mother. That's a wonderful irony, too, about that ending, which I'm sure we'll get to momentarily, that he is reunited with his mother. He gets his wish, but it's a fake mother. She's artificial, too. But it's appropriate because he's not a real boy. Those are all Kubrickian ironies, because Kubrick was the master of irony. That was his big thing. So I think it fused very well, the Kubrickian pessimism there that comes in the ending with the Spielbergian tenderness, the emotional tenderness. They meet there in a beautiful way. I think it's surprising, too. You would not think these two men would have a vision that could be combined, but I think they did. I think they pulled it off.
Yeah, well, and talking to people about this film, they go like, well, I mean, David acted really weird. And I go, some of these people, it's like, well, I mean, I don't think you've had kids yourself, too. It's like, yeah, he's acting really weird because he's like a robot. But like, there's that scene at the dinner table where he just breaks out and starts laughing because there's like a noodle hanging off his mother's mouth. I'm like, my son breaks out laughing about stuff that literally makes no sense. And it's funny. Like even Aria, like she has moments where she just breaks out laughing and you're sitting there as like an adult and you're like, I don't understand what's going on here, but it's funny.
Kids are a lot of fun. They bring out the kid in you. That's the fun part of being a parent. You get to be a kid again vicariously.
And I think it was that moment too, I think, where she really started to see him as, like, this is my boy, right? To a degree, at least really warming up to the idea, because it's, that's how a kid acts. I remember how Martin used to do stuff like that too. And then
that's a substitute for Martin. And it works only so long as Martin's out of the picture. Once he comes back, she prefers the real thing to the artificial. Hence the crux, the crux. What's real, what's artificial? Where do we draw the line with genetic engineering? Where are we going to draw the line with these clones that when they start coming? And you know how the cloning will start. It'll start like this. It'll start with, because it's already started, where they can go into the embryo and make modifications to get rid of birth defects or illnesses. And pretty soon it'll be like, okay, so this kid is going to have I don't know, some weird diseases, ALS, let's say, or something like that. And we can go in and we can take it out. We just need your permission to modify some genes. Okay, you sign it. But then at the same time, can you make his eyes blue while they're fixing that disease that we don't want, that genetic defect? Make its eyes blue. And then that's how it'll start. It'll start with this tailor-made humans that will gradually become more and more designed almost eugenically to replace real humans, that is, birth-born mammalian humans. And mammalians have invented a completely different way of life from reptiles and birds, which is just based on eggs. You don't have a womb. You come out in your own artificial single apartment, let's say, in that egg. And then it hatches, and then it's on the way. There's no bonding with the mother there. That's the whole thing with reptilian and avian birth. There's no chance for the offspring to bond with the mother because they lay the eggs and leave. So you're on your own. But emotions come in with the mammalian midbrain along with live birth. And actually, mammals didn't invent live birth. There were some fishes before that in the Silurian epoch that were already giving live birth in the water. But it was perfected by mammals, and it became a trademark of mammals to give live birth to a helpless offspring that therefore requires care from the mother, which then sets up bonding and emotional warmth. So the one-to-one relationship between the kitten and its mother, let's say, is mammalian. That's the new thing in evolution, that bond with the mother that we have carried on into, since we're mammals, we've carried it on with live birth. But these clones might not be, right now the process is live birth. You get in, you make modifications, introduce a sperm into an ovum, create a zygote, all this done in the laboratory, and then you implant it in a living woman's womb. So then she carries it to term for that point. So it's not like they're not live born, but still there will be problems. There will be racism. I guarantee. I think this person sees that. Yeah, go ahead.
Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors.
No, I was like, that goes without a given. Like, we're going to put tattoos on these clones. Like, it's 100% going to happen. We're going to put barbells on the back of their head. You know, like, not to sound like kind of cliche, because I know that's kind of a lame tattoo that people get, but like it's going to happen 100%. You know, and it's going to be like, eventually, like, there's going to be like, well, can we let these guys like play professional sports? Because if you can go in the embryo and go like, oh yeah, like, we're just going to increase his muscle mass and his fast twitch muscles, and it's going to get to that point.
Taking steroids, and that's cheating. So it's not, he's not a real athlete if he does that, right?
Well, yeah, you know, he is, because it's something that was created in a lab, right? It's not natural. It's not organic. I mean, it's made out of organic material, but with like the help of, you know, how many different prods and needles and mechanical machines to make it happen, right? It's almost like H.R. Geiger and his art, you know, where the machine and the organic material. Okay, so Martin, they find a cure for his disease. He ends up coming back home, and then this starts like the awkward relationship. Can like Monica love David as much as she loves Martin? And it's funny how it happens. Like, people will say like in these sequences that Martin's being very mean to David, but I don't know if I necessarily see it like that. It's more like, you know, like an older brother screwing around with a younger brother. Like
brother rivalry. The older brother and the brother. Yeah, right.
I don't think he's like purposely like being mean. Like, he's not like beating up David or any. I mean, it probably wouldn't have been a good idea if he did try to hit David, because David probably rip his arms off. But you know, like, that's the way I interpret it. Is like, Martin's not. Yeah, he's being a jerk. But I mean, a lot of kids that age are jerks to their younger brothers. I think like the only thing that was like really mean was him telling David to go cut Monica's hair with a pair of scissors, because he knew how bad that was. He really did. He knew how bad it was. Them like fighting with each other over the spinach at the dinner table. I mean, what brother hasn't done stuff like that, you know? But it's also in that moment too, when in particular, because you see David's face droop because they're, you know, he's a machine. They don't eat. Monica kind of realizes, oh wait, yeah, he is like a robot. Right, because little boys don't do that.
He's not not a true member of the family, in other words, nor can he ever be by those terms.
It's interesting that it was basically her husband was the one. As soon as Martin showed up, he's like, just get David out of here. I don't want anything to do with him. Almost immediately, right? And it takes the incident at the pool party.
Positions, Monica and Henry. She initially didn't want it. He wanted the kid. Then they switch positions. She wants him, and then he wants to get rid of him once the other brother is back. So they've switched positions, which is fascinating.
Yeah. And it's basically what happens at the pool party is really what seals the deal. Is the kids are just playing around, and it's like, well, look at this mech, like this isn't like all the other mechs, right? And it's like, oh, does this have the new like pain sensory type thing? Like a kid would, I don't know, like what can your video game system do, right? Like they're not being mean. They're just, this is what kids do. And so he gives them a little cut with, not a cut, he just kind of jabs him a little bit, the knife, just to see, how active his pain sensory relays are, and they are. And it's one of those moments where you realize, well, David's pretty human, because he goes right to his brother Martin and says, like, please, save me, like keep me away from these guys. And he's just holding him because he wants warmth, he wants protection from his family, protection that his family provides to him. And he goes into the water, and David doesn't realize what he's doing. He doesn't know that like organic material needs to breathe. He doesn't have to breathe. He can sit underneath that water for 5,000 years and nothing's going to happen to him in terms of like, well, I mean, eventually he'll break, but you understand my point, right? He doesn't have to breathe.
Another level. It's because on another level, he's a mythological being. So biological laws do not apply to mythological. So it's not the same laws. So there's also that dimension to that scene. You can't kill him. You can't kill a myth. It's the way you can a biological organism. He's a mythological figure, a lost child who is questing for God, looking for his mother. And the mother turns out to be a goddess. Basically, the blue fairy is a goddess analogous to the Virgin Mary. But you can plug into that semiotic slot any god or goddess that you want that humans are faithful to, and they need gods. And that's the thing, I think. The film asks, what is it that makes us human, truly human? Is it our ability to think? And if that's all, well, we can replicate that with machines. They can think too, and they can think even faster than we can in terms of just data retrieval. But there's more to human beings than that. Humans have dreams. And when they dream, they go to sleep, and the astral body leaves the physical body, and it goes out into the astral plane, where it has adventures and experiences. Then it comes back into the physical body when it wakes up in the morning. No machine can ever do that, because machines don't have souls. They don't have what's Rudolf Steiner called an astral body. They don't have that. And there's no way to replicate that. So the answer to, do androids dream of electric sheep, is that no, they absolutely do not. They cannot dream. They will never dream. And that's the dividing line there that creates the abyss of difference between machines and humans that can never be bridged. We can dream of gods. Machines can't. And when we dream of gods, we build civilizations out of those dreams. That's the whole thing. You can't build a civilization with atheism. All you can do with atheism and materialism is destroy a civilization. You can analyze it out of existence. That begins with the Socratic man, all of Nietzsche and Spengler, who comes in and begins analyzing all the traditions, analyzing all the myths and the rituals, and then it leads to nihilism, and the culture slowly disintegrates. It's as though an autoimmune disorder has come into it and disintegrates it. But you have to have it's those visions and the fidelity to that vision. Think of a Muslim and his or her faith for Allah that leads them then to build the Kaaba and then have a whole Muslim civilization out of just one vision that came to this guy in a cave with an angel being that comes. That's his blue fairy, by the way, the angel Gabriel, who comes to Muhammad and worships or whispers rather in his ear what will become the foundation for a whole new civilization. So that's the thing. We can have these dreams, and the dreams will lead to the creation of cultures. Machines can't do that; they never will. So that's the issue here.
Well, so eventually Henry convinces Monica, okay, we got to get rid of David. Go send him to the corporation to get destroyed. Monica can't do it. She drives David out and then drops him out in a field, basically. It's the middle of the forest, really. She abandons her own child in a lot of ways. And you could tell there's a part of her that there's a part of her that didn't want to do this. Like, I think she loved David, and the idea of like sending her own child to like, because I think at this point she does feel like David is her child. Sending her own child off to his own death is it's too horrific to think about. She leaves David out in the forest, and she tells him, stay away from organic, stay away from people like me, stay with your own kind, stay away from the flesh fairs, and, just go live your own life, right? But what she doesn't understand is that David, he can't live his life without her. That's literally his entire meaning, is to be with his mommy.
Like, I was just going to mention Hansel and Gretel. Remember that, where the parents lead the kids out into the forest and they abandon them there. And then they have to venture with the witch. It's that same kind of thing. There usually is with heroic characters. There's something wrong with their parents. There'll be an initial set of parents that were usually of aristocracy that will then abandon the infant, like they abandoned Oedipus. And the way that these ancients thought about infant abandonment, which they would do if it was a crucial situation, is that you don't kill the infant, you abandon it, because if the gods want the infant to live, they'll make sure that it does live. And if they don't, then it'll die. So what they're actually doing is turning it over to the gods. And there's an echo of that in what Monica's doing. You don't kill him because he might deserve to live, but put him out in the forest and see if fate makes it in such a way that he does survive. And of course he does. He manages to ironically become the last human on the planet, even though at the end of the film he's a machine, but he has all the human characteristics that humans used to have. So he outlasts the human species. It's fantastic irony. It's just great writing.
And it's also like Monica is thinking in the sense of like she's abandoning David, and she's thinking in the sense of like organic, right? In the sense that you talked about human beings able to have dreams and then create new gods and then create new meanings in their life. David's incapable of doing that. Monica can't. David cannot do that. He takes things that he kind of, soon after this, right? His whole meaning to life is to be able to find the blue fairy to become like a real boy, but he's basically just cribbing that from Pinocchio, right? Like he wouldn't have been able to, he's not thinking that up in a dream state. He's not thinking that up in like an astral, in the ether. Does that make sense?
It does, but in a way he ends up being more human than the other humans around him, precisely because of his fidelity to his god, or goddess, in this case, the fairy, which is what humans do. They're faithful to their chosen, what in India is called an Ishtadevata, a chosen divinity that you choose to worship and you're faithful to it. That's the human signature that this machine who cannot dream yet has. It's a very human attribute that it has. It's very complex. There's a lot to the narrative that's a lot to chew on there and think about. All the complexities and ironies and nuances and so forth.
There's a part of me that I know obviously they couldn't do it for the film, but there's a part of me that kind of wants to know what happened to Monica after this incident. Like,
yeah.
Did she ever recover from it? Did she ever go and try to look for David herself? Did she become suicidal? Did their marriage fall apart because, Henry pressured her to get rid of David? Or did she just go about her life?
Maybe somebody will do a Netflix series on that. Hire some writers to come in like they're doing with Blade Runner, go back and do prequels and sequels. And I knew that the film would become a classic. When it first came out, nobody liked it. I remember my friends not liking it. And I remember critics were pretty harsh with it. And audience, it was a box office flop. But I knew when I saw it was going to be a classic. And I was telling everybody that. And I wrote about it in my book in 2005, the Celluloid Dragons book. And I was correct. I knew because it touches on so many themes that our civilization in 2001 had not yet caught up with. And so I think the film now is more relevant than ever before, with both the advances we have now with AI, but also with genetic engineering. Those two are developing side by side.
So I guess we'll go into Act 2, right? Now accompanied solely by Teddy, which is the teddy bear that David ends up taking from Martin. Martin ends up just giving it to him, but that's kind of a little bit in Act 1. And from this point on, there's this AI teddy bear that follows David around everywhere he goes. It's like his little sidekick, his little partner. It's the nice. It's something that I come to suspect of a lot of Spielberg movies. This kind of sentimentality. It's like, well, of course, it's this cute teddy bear that's going to be following David around the whole time, but it works so well in terms of the film, right? Like I'm not going to lie, when I watch this film, like I was bawling my eyes out. Huge chunks of it, right? Because it's just because of like all the deeper meanings to it. And then like there's just the story of David. Like just that alone is going to pull at your heartstrings. Like my wife was watching and she's like, I can't watch this. It was too much for her as a mother.
Emotionally overwhelming. It is. Yeah, it's absolutely correct. But it's that way. It's supposed to be that way to evoke a human response to this material. So there's that. Spielberg bringing very... I think that if Kubrick's plan had gone through to produce the film and have Spielberg direct it, I don't think it would have worked. I think it would have been a disaster because Kubrick is such a control freak. There's no way he would have just been pushing Spielberg around and telling him what he wants and what to do. Why not just direct it himself? I don't think it would have. Although I do have the feeling that if Kubrick had done it himself, it would be a better film. It's not that it's not a great film, but there's some awkwardness in it. There's some awkwardness in the writing too, as well. I'm not sure that the choice of the heavy metal music to be Kid Rock in the Fleshfare was a good one. That feels forced to me. There's something wrong. The whole Fleshfare scene is very awkward. Something's not right about it. Kubrick would have ironed all that out, simply because of his obsessive compulsiveness. It takes 3 years to make a film, and that's unheard of in Hollywood. So far as I know, he's the only director that the studio's ever allowed to do that because he made money for them every single time. Every one of his films made money. Yeah.
So, okay, now accompanied solely by Teddy, David recalls the adventures of Pinocchio and decides that he's going to find the Blue Fairy in order to become a human, in which he believes will regain Monica's love. David and Teddy are captured by the Fleshfare, a traveling circus-like event where obsolete mecha are destroyed before jeering crowds. About to be destroyed himself, David pleads for his life, and the audience, deceived by David's realistic nature, revolts and allows David to escape alongside Gigolo Joe.
Insert something here too before we overlook it. I think one of the best scenes in the film is when that balloon rises, and at first you think it's a moon, and then it rises, and then you see that it's a balloon, because it's a wonderful way of linking back to the history of science fiction, which begins with Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Adventure of Hans Pfaall, P-F-A-L-L, who gets into a balloon and takes him to the moon. And that's the birth of science fiction, which Poe really invented in the 1830s. Or 5 or 6 stories, they're not his best stories, but they are the birth of the genre there. And that's one of them, that Jules Verne then comes along, takes the torch from him, and sends rockets to the moon in the form of cannonballs. You get a rocket that's designed like a large bullet put into a cannon, which they fire at the moon, and so forth.
Yeah, it is and that's one thing, is that this entire film is beautifully shot, like the cinematography, the way they like stage the settings and stuff like that. And you mentioned that moon shot, which is probably the most beautiful shot in the film in terms of just pure filmmaking aesthetic, because it is deceiving. You're looking at it, and initially when I first watched the film years and years ago, I had the same experience as you. When I was quite young at the time and walked away from it, thought this is a classic. This is going to be recognized after. And that first shot, you're like, oh, I don't understand what's going on here. Has the moon moved closer on this planet that's dying or something, right? And then it only takes like a couple seconds. You realize it's a balloon, right? It's beautiful.
It deceives you with artifice. There again, with artifice. Oh, it fooled you. It's a fake moon. It's mechanized. Lots of nice touches.
So yeah, they escape with Gigolo Joe, a male prostitute.
He's the Tin Man from Wizard of Oz. Just like Teddy is the little dog with Toto, Wizard of Oz. He's the Tin Man.
Who we see earlier has been framed for a murder of one of his clientels. It was a jealous husband that realized that she was going to Gigolo Joe for her needs. But we got to try to keep this PG-13. So I tried to, so we can't really get into all of that too much. But so he's on the run for me. Sorry, what were you going to say, John?
Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors.
He would not have been worried about getting an R rating. In fact, I think he was going to be R-rated. If you look at the storyboards for Rouge City that he was going to film, instead of just the buildings being in the shape of women's bodies, they were in the shape of people having sex, pornographically designed buildings, which is the whole point of Rouge City, because it vulgarizes and trivializes human sexuality to a Las Vegas style, just fun. It's like a roller coaster ride. So it becomes disconnected from the act of love, from mammalian warmth and love. It just becomes mechanized that way. And I think Spielberg, he was worried about Disney. He was worried about the audience. It's a kid's movie. It was packaged as a kid's movie and sold as a kid's movie, but nobody understood it. Kubrick wouldn't have wasted time with any of that. He would have put in the pornographic buildings, gotten the R rating. It wouldn't have bothered him. So there are other things that Spielberg did, because there's an expensive book now, I think it's like $400, that has all the storyboards that Kubrick had artists draw up for him while he was alive. So you can see the basic arc of the story is there. It's already in Kubrick's mind. I think he made a number of mistakes. Like I say, with the Kid Rock music, Kubrick would not have put that in there. In the Fleshfares, he would have thought of something else. And then Kubrick liked classical music, so he liked to score most of his movies with classical music. But Spielberg isn't that sophisticated. He doesn't know classical music. Consequently, we only get one piece of classical music in the film from Der Rosenkavalier when they're going across the bridge. The bridge and the music opens up. That's from that opera, because Kubrick told him he was going to put it there. And so that's the only bit of classical film music you get in the film. Whereas I think with Kubrick, with his encyclopedic knowledge of classical music, we had it all the way through. So that's another thing I think Kubrick would have done better.
So they end up going to Rouge City, which, as you pointed out, there's basically, I don't know, is it like an escort version of Las Vegas type thing?
Yeah, just Vegas. Red Rouge is associated with sexuality, with lust, not just with anger, but also with lust. In the esoteric traditions, red is a very aggressive energy, and it's also connected with lust.
Gigolo Joe mentions to David that there's a computer, answer machine called Dr. No. They decide that they were going to ask him, where's the blue fairy? They give them Dr. No gives them cryptic messages. They decide that all these cryptic messages means that they have to go to New York City, which they do, which is already underneath water. And once they go to New York City, this is when David realizes that he's not all that special. They go to the Rockefeller Center, and he realizes that there is not just him. There are literally thousands of Davids, and even a Darlene, and he has an existential crisis and actually kills one of the Davids, which is, I mean, there's no way to put around it. It's murder, right? He murders him. He has a conversation with the scientist, Professor Hobby, who's the guy who initially created David, tells him that they did leave him all these little breadcrumbs, hoping that, because of his program and the way that he was designed, that he would go out and search for meaning himself, right? The meaning, purpose, exactly like a human being would, unlike all these other AIs. And he's quite happy with himself that he was able to inflict this on a robot, this pain and suffering that David has been going through. He's like, well, look, it's a success, like what a madman. Sorry, that's a tangent, but I couldn't possibly imagine looking at that poor robot or kid or whatever word you want to use and go like, look, my experiment worked. You're searching for the meaning and purpose to your life, even though I could have just not done this to you this entire time. But I mean, that's a tangent. David decides that he wants to kill himself, so he just falls off the building into the water that's engulfed New York City. But him being a mecha, he's not going to drown. So unless the initial fall basically disintegrated his body, it's just not going to happen. But it doesn't matter. The meaning was David wanted to kill himself. He didn't want to live anymore once he realized that he wasn't special anymore, which is, I mean, that gets into Nietzsche and existentialism and all that type of philosophical outlook. Like, once we realize that we're not that special, what do we do at this point? Like, that's basically the whole thing with existentialism and Nietzsche's, like, God is dead. It's like, well, we've destroyed that special bond that made human beings unique. A unique organism on this planet that's separate from all the other organisms, right? Now we're just kind of molecules, no different than like a dog or molecules. You just kind of put it in different places and maybe we're slightly more intelligent, but in reality, we're basically just the same organic matter that everything else is on this planet, which seemingly has not much purpose other than, to eat and reproduce.
Heidegger, though, responds to this problem of Nietzsche announcing the death of God and therefore sort of equating humans with just animals. We're just fancy animals. We're a little higher IQs. And Heidegger says, no, there's an abyss of difference between humans and animals for the following reasons: that when rocks have no world whatsoever, rocks do not make worlds. They are a world that has been made. With animals, on the other hand, they're poor in world. They do have world. Umwelt is the word that he uses, which means world round. But for the beetle traversing the blade of grass, it thinks of the blade of grass as just a way through. A way to get through. It doesn't recognize the blade of grass as an entity in and of itself. A lizard sunning itself on the rock doesn't see the rock or is aware of it. It's just a place to get some sunlight. So the animal is poor in world. But now with language, with the human invention of language, the human being is rich in world because the human being makes worlds because he has language. And the animals don't have it to this extent anyway. They have their languages, but not this complicated and not this capable of abstract thinking. And with that, language, as he says, is the house of being. And it's the poet's job in a civilization to announce new world horizons through new feats of language, like Homer does with the Iliad and the Odyssey. That's his response to Nietzsche trying to deontologize humans. As Nietzsche says in The Will to Power, man has been on an inclined plane downward in his own self-estimation since Copernicus. It's just been a downward, down. And then we get all the way down to Kafka. Now we're a bug with the metamorphosis. We're a mere bug under the scrutiny of science, the lamplight of science that can scrutinize it. That's it. So Kafka deontologizes humans too, as well. But not Heidegger. He says, no. Human beings are fundamentally unique. They are fundamentally different from any other thing in creation. In the old chain of being where we used to have, you start with minerals and then you have plants and then you have animals and then human consciousness, that remains for Heidegger, that chain of being. He's not quite the deconstructionist that the French pomo philosophers think that he is. We build worlds and we take them seriously, and that's what makes us human. And in the film, you could say we build worlds with myths, with gods and goddesses and myths. And not just language, but with gods and goddesses. We dream worlds forth into being. We make them.
Well, then when David falls into the water, which is, I guess you would say, this is the lowest of the low. This is as low as it possibly gets for David. He gets a glimpse of the Blue Fairy, which is the statue that was on Coney Island. So only going to the absolute low that a human being can go to, or the lowest of the low that an AI could go to, is when David finally sees that maybe not all hope is lost, right? So the authorities end up taking Gigolo Joe away, but before they can, he presses some buttons on the machine that they use to travel to New York, to turn into like a submarine type vehicle. David and Teddy go to see the Blue Fairy, and he sits there and begs the Blue Fairy to make him a real boy. A Ferris wheel collapses, which ends up pinning the machine underneath the water for 2,000 years. And so David is just sitting there praying to the Blue Fairy for however long his power supply lasts for. I don't know. Let's take a guess. 500 years. I don't know how long they last.
And at this point, Spielberg could have chosen to end the film. And I know some film critics said that it should have ended here, which would have been really haunting and very Kubrickian to have that last punishment inflicted on him. But people forget that the rest of the film was intended by Kubrick. It's not just a Spielbergianization, a sentimentalization of it. It was intended by and I think he's correct. I think the last part of the film is the best part. I think the payoff is really rewarding there with the reunion with the mother and the irony of the simulacrum that they create for him. And they animate the Blue Fairy because they have the ability to animate it and turn it into a real sort of goddess for him because they have compassion for him. It's a beautiful ending. I disagree with those people who don't like it. Those are people probably who are uncomfortable with getting emotional in a film. They're probably the same people who don't like the ending of Schindler's List because it gets them upset. Well, too bad. Guess what? Human beings have emotions. The film should make you upset because that's the whole point of it. It's testing your humanity. People who are inhumane are the ones who are not going to respond with tears to that ending with that reunion with the boy and his mother. It works on so many levels. I think the last 40 minutes of the film are just amazing. Starting with once they get to New York. From then on, it's just one great scene after the next. It's just amazing.
Yeah, personally, I like the middle section of the film, which is the one we kind of just covered, is for up until they get to New York, I think is one of the weaker parts of the film. You mentioned the Fleshfares. I think Spielberg kind of, he's Jewish or whatever. I think the Fleshfares were supposed to kind of like symbolize the Holocaust to a degree and stuff like that. You talked about the unpersoning of people. I mean, Timothy Snyder wrote a great book about that, the Bloodlands, and how like these lands were getting invaded, and then you had like Poles and Jews and Ukrainians and all these different people that were kind of just like stateless people living in this Bloodlands area, which pretty much, legally speaking, anything could be done to these people, and it was.
Almost sacred. That's the same thing as Agamben with his book, Almost Sacred. Yeah. The Jews were put into that position. They're deontologized. The rights of the state are withdrawn from them. Therefore, you can do anything you want to them with impunity and get away with it.
And I think that's what Spielberg was getting at with the Fleshfares. I think that's what I took away from it, was we're going to get to the point where human beings, and we've talked about it on this show so far, in terms of cloning. I could totally see something like this happening with clones. I could totally see something that's happening with Mecha. I mean, there's also like a strain of that's part of conservatism. Personally, I kind of identify myself, if I'm going to talk about like my politics or what have you, it's like I'm conservative for the most part, but there's a strain of conservatism, which is, I think, the people running these Fleshfares is kind of supposed to represent like the Luddite aspect of it, whereas they're constantly trying to go back to the past. And this is the thing that always frustrates me so much with like conservatism. And we've talked about Oswald Spengler on the show a bit right now. Oswald Spengler was deeply conservative, but at the same time, he was able to recognize, hey, there's a new technology that's been introduced into society. You're not turning the clock on that. You kind of have to go with it. But I could see these like Luddite types running stuff like Fleshfares. Well, I know lots of people like this, you see it now with electric cars where everyone's like, well, these electric cars are blowing up and yada, yada, yada. I said, yeah, there's going to be issues with these things. Like we're talking about newish technology that's being mass produced and yada, yada, yada. And I think it's going to take a little bit longer than most people than what they're speculating. But like I say, in 65 years, pretty much all cars are going to be electric. They're all going to be hybrid at the very least. And you're fighting this thing, that you're fighting something like it. This is a pointless fight to be having it because it's not going back. It'd be like trying to fight the internet. It's like, oh, we're just going to get rid of the internet. Well, it's not going anywhere, buddy. You're going to have to learn how to use it.
Yeah, that was Ted Kaczynski's whole problem with his essay that got him arrested when it was published by the Washington Post. about industrial society and its future. I had a kid come to me once when I was in Scottsdale who had somehow received the rights for Ted Kaczynski's literature. And so he was becoming the editor of Ted Kaczynski's writings from prison. And I'd only read the one piece, the famous piece, which is absolute Ludditism. Kaczynski's position is that all technology should be gotten rid of. And that's what the kid was sitting here telling me. And I was like, well, what about famine? One of the big problems we've had through human history is famine and drought. And then people starve. And in China, during the Cultural Revolution, they ate their children. What they would do is so you don't have to kill your own children, was they would sell them or swap them with the neighbor's children. Then they would murder the neighbor's children and eat them. We've solved that problem. Technology has solved that problem. We don't need to worry about drought and famine anymore. We don't have to worry about food scarcity anymore. Also, technology has gotten us out of the food chain. We're not running around with tigers nipping at our heels anymore, chasing us up trees. Those days are gone. So technology has put us at the top of the food chain. What about that? Technology has provided us with an artificial world that's like a womb made out of culture and technology wedded together that protects us from the elements and protects us from predation. What about all that? That's got to go too. I don't think you know what you're asking. I don't think that position is fully thought through carefully what the consequences would be of going back to cavemen. That means going back to bestiality, tribal warfare, fighting panthers. Talk about a dark age. I mean, there's no upside to that. So Kaczynski needs to go. That kind of mentality, it's not going to. So you're correct about technology. You have to keep up with it somehow.
Well, that's exactly it, right? And like it's the technology is just not going to go anywhere. I mean, this is somewhat of a tangent considering all the other things we were talking about. But like that was like I'm watching these guys and the Fleshfare thing, and I'm like, I know people like this, right? And you try to explain to them, it's like I don't understand what you're getting upset about, because it's either why can't you? I mean, other people have used that technology for their purposes. You can do the same thing too.
To be critical about technology, though, and I think that was Marshall McLuhan's point, is that you escape through understanding. So you find out what the bias of the medium is that's manipulating your thoughts. So you step outside of that loop and correctly identify what it is and what it does. Because for McLuhan, every medium, and by media, he meant not just writing media, but any form of technology whatsoever, including writing media, always comes with a bias. For instance, Neil Postman talks about this. He's sort of a McLuhanite guy. He was a very great intellectual. He's talking about, now consider for a second, smoke signals. You've got Native Americans communicating with each other using smoke signals. You can't do philosophy with smoke signals. So the medium excludes certain things that it cannot do and only emphasizes certain specialized things that it can do. And that's the same for every medium. And Postman used to talk about television, and he says that the bias of television is entertainment. You can't do philosophy on television. You can't do any real learning on television. And he says Sesame Street did not teach children how to read. It taught them how to like watching television. That's what was going on there, the imprinting on the neurons of a new technology that will then manipulate and control them. Unless they get outside of it, they go to college or whatever, and become aware of how they're being manipulated through advertising, through radio, through TV, now internet. It's all manipulation until you are critical and you achieve a critical distance from it. Not to say no to the technology, because you're right, it's useless, but to understand and get control over how it's manipulating you so that it cannot manipulate you. So that's the thing about technology. That's
exactly the right way. That's exactly how I look at it too, right? Is you have to, I think it's increasingly difficult because of just kind of a lot of the nature of the technology, especially these shorts, which are very, very insidious. And I'm guilty of it too, scrolling through and watching like these TikTok videos and these YouTube shorts sometimes. It's literally designed to destroy your attention span, but most people don't realize that. At least I'm somewhat aware that I know that's exactly what it's doing, where the vast majority of people they're not aware that that's what they're designed to do, is to destroy your attention span. So you could you could lie about something, and within like 2 weeks, they're just not going to remember it. I guess we'll get on to Act 3, which I think both me and you agree is probably the best part of the film. So we cut to 2,000 years later. Humanity has become extinct. Manhattan is now buried under glacial ice. So I guess there was a massive ice age that happened on the planet. Mecha have evolved into an advanced form and a group known as the Specialist is interested in humanity, find and resurrect David and Teddy. They reconstruct the Swanton family home from David's memories before explaining via an interactive version of the Blue Fairy that he cannot possibly be human. However, they can recreate Monica through genetic material from a strand of hair that Teddy kept. This version of Monica can live for only one day. It cannot be revived again due to copyright protection. They explained it in the film. Like, you can only take something out of the space-time continuum for like a day, and then it's got to go back.
But it's like Faust, the quest for that one moment which you wish would last forever. That's what Faust's quest is about. And this is the moment for David. Doesn't matter that it's one day. For him, it lasts forever. The other night, I was thinking back over my life. As you get older, I'm 55 now. As you get older, you get more nostalgic, and then you go back and you think, what were my favorite moments in life? What were my favorite days that if I could go back to that day, I would wish to live that day forever? And there's maybe 5 of them. Over the course of a 55-year life, I've probably had 5 days that I wished would last forever. Almost all of them had something to do with women, almost every one of them.
David, and then so they do it. David says, yes, this is what I want. And David spends his happiest day with Monica. And as she falls asleep in the evening, Monica tells David that she always loved him and the everlasting moment he had been waiting for. As the narrator describes, David falls asleep and goes to the place where dreams are born. He self-destructs himself and said, there's no point. I don't want to go on living without my mommy. So that's the ending of the film.
He gets his wish, but it's bittersweet. We know it's only temporary. We know they're both going to die.
Well, I mean, initially when this film came out, people were complaining about that ending and people like being too sentimental. And I go, that ending I don't understand where they're getting that from. Like, it's sentimental in the sense like we're watching, David and like a mom and dad relationship, and they bake a cake together and they have like the best day ever, and they're playing hide and seek with his teddy bear, and this is everything that a child wants. But David knows that it's only going to last for so long, and the emotions that must have been going through him when Monica's like, I don't understand why I'm just so tired. Something came over me, and he knows that she's gonna, like, I'm getting emotional just talking about it right now, that she's gonna die, and that's it.
The whole human life cycle, one day. That's the beautiful thing about it. And we come from the mother, we come out of the womb, and we go back to the mother, the tomb, from womb to tomb. We go back to the mother, the great abyss. But we also do it on a daily basis. Every time we fall asleep and dream, we're going back into the mother womb of consciousness, from which our daily consciousness is born like a sun rising. And so the film recaptures that. It is always about the return to the mother. No matter which way you talk about the biological life cycle or the daily consciousness life cycle or the mythological life cycle, they all come back to the mother. So it's perfectly appropriate to end with the reunion to the mother, because we all go back to her, all of us. So it's a perfect ending.
What's your opinion on all of this? Like, there's a part of me that kind of feels like, is this all like just kind of like a memory that they imprinted into David? Like, is Monica actually there? Like, because there's like a final shot where David, he cries when Monica tells him that she loves him, and David doesn't have tear ducts. Now, that could have been just Spielberg putting that in there because that's what Spielberg does, right? Like, he puts he's a master at the emotional aspect of filmmaking. Yes, there's a part of me that go like, are they just telling David that that's the case for him? Because these mecha specialists, these are just basically, this is like the end product of like years and years and years of like AI improving upon itself. Like, human beings had perfected AI, and then AI has just kind of continued the product. Some people were confused and thought these things were aliens, but they're actually AI. You can see the circuits and the actual robots. Is it them in a roundabout way telling David, like, hey, like, we're kind of like archaeologists and we're trying to find like our flood story. We're trying to find our Jesus. We're trying to find, which is humanity, really, right? Because we created them. In a lot of ways, we would be their gods.
They're on a quest too. And the irony, again, another irony is when you, at the end of the film, when you hear Ben Kingsley's voice come back, and his voice is that of the lead robot. But the film begins with his voice telling us about the flood, and it ends with his voice. And the revelation is that the entire film has been scanned from the memories of a robot. The whole thing is artificial. The whole story itself is artificial. We don't know if it's real or not. It's just what they got, like an archaeologist, what they got out of his memories. They scanned it, and this is the only information they have about how humans actually were and what they were like. So the human being, in a way, becomes their grail. There's a wonderful irony there. The human being is the grail for them. That's their blue fairy for these robots. That's what they want to find out about. That's their god that they're pursuing. I'd never thought about that before. That's
yeah, because that's when I watched it. I was like, is it the robot? Like, is the AI telling David, like, we turned you on because we needed this information, but we can only turn you on for the day. So what can, and they're like basically lying to him. So, well, what can we do to make this the happiest day of your life, right? And they already know what the answer is going to be, right? Because they've already scanned his memories. So they decided, like, hey, it's the least we can do is to give this kid that one last memory before he goes. And I don't know if I'm just offbeat on that.
Oh, stay the moment. You are so fair. If Mephistopheles can ever get Faust to admit that, then the quest is over. But it never happens. Faust never does find that one ultimate experience that he would wish would last forever. But David does. He finds it, and he's completely satisfied with it. And you don't walk away from the film feeling like he got cheated. His wish was manifested in the only possible way that it could be. And it's good enough. It satisfies him. So you do walk away with a feeling of satisfaction.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And then there's like, to kind of add on to kind of like, just kind of the sadness of the whole thing too, is like we see Teddy, he like crawls up on the bed, and, you know, she's passed away, and David is self-destruct, and, you know, what's going to happen? Like, Teddy's just kind of by himself now. You know, I'm sure the AI are going to take care of him, but I mean, Teddy's capable of...
Oh, Teddy doesn't have feelings. He doesn't care. It's not going to bother him.
It seems like he did care though about David. I mean, that's the one thing that they maybe could have done a little bit better in the film.
Bond with them, you know, kind of, and be as like animal spirits in fairy tales and folktales are always these helping spirits. In Star Wars, it becomes Chewbacca. You know, that had been based on Flash Gordon, which Lucas originally wanted to make. For Flash Gordon, you have his sidekick as a lion man, and so Lucas puts in the Chewbacca character as the animal sidekick. So you got to have the animal sidekick for the hero to ground him in terrestrial powers, earthly, chthonic terrestrial powers that are like instincts. All Native American myths have these animal helpers that come in, land on the hero's shoulder like a bird, and whispers a secret, or goes and finds a bone for him and brings it back. That becomes the seed form for creating a new ancestor being, and so forth. You got to have the animals in there to helping the hero.
That, to me, like, I guess because we're at the end now, to me, that's one of the things that they maybe could have done with the film a little bit better is, like, David's supposed to be the only one that's capable of feeling love or different types of human emotions. But there are moments where it seems like the other mechas do to a degree. Like, there's the scene with Gigolo Joe where he's going to, you know, do his job, whatever, with the client that was murdered by her husband. There's a moment there where he realizes, you could see it on his face to a degree, where it's just like, oh, what has happened here? You know, like if he was like true mecha and he only served one purpose, which was to be a male prostitute, he would look at that indifferently. It's just like, oh, whatever.
He's one of the specialists, the mechas who are specialized to perform only one task, whereas David's a generalist. That's the whole thing. And we as human beings are generalists. We're not just herbivores, we're carnivores as well. We're generalists. We're not slotted into a particular eco niche, like the birds are stuck with the sky, the ants are stuck with the ground. We're not like that. We can move in all worlds. And so as humans, we are generalists within the great chain of being, which gives us a much more flexible survival value. Species that are specialized to particular eco niches are going to die out when there's a catastrophe that hits that eco niche. They'll go down with it, like the dinosaurs did. But humans are more flexible because we're omni-everything, omni-thought, omnivores, omni-consciousness. We are something special. We're a little different in the chain of being. I think that's part of what we're supposed to think about with David. He is different in that way. He's a generalist, not a specialist. But so is humans. Being human, we're generalists in the great chain of being. It's another human trait that's essential, along with our spirituality.
Wrapping up, I mean, what are the things that the film did really well? What are things that maybe they didn't do quite as well? And kind of like, what is your final thoughts on the film, John?
It's a great film. You know, out of 5 stars, I would give it 4.5. It's a great film. It will be looked back on as a classic. The photography is fantastic. Some of the stuff I didn't like all that much was Rouge City. I didn't really like the look of it. It looked kind of cheap. I mean, it's supposed to be cheap, but if you compare it with the city, the similar city in Blade Runner 2049, now that works. That's beautiful. What they did there, it doesn't seem cheap and pre-made, like they're almost like it's just cheap. The look of it is cheap. The art direction is cheap. That part's very awkward with that city. I think Kubrick would have done that much better. And the screenplay gets awkward sometimes. There are awkward moments where you're not sure about the writing that I think Kubrick would have eliminated. And but John Williams' soundtrack is excellent. We don't have Kubrick's classical music, which he would have preferred, but John Williams that's one of his best scores with that piano that he has hauntingly going on all through the film. That's beautiful. That works very well. and the visuals are just spectacular. So that's what would be my final overarching review. I think it's a masterpiece, but a flawed one. It's like pulling out a gem, but there's a little flaw in it. So it's not perfect, but it is damn good. And it is a gem. It's worth it.
Yeah, my complaints are about the same. I didn't like the Rouge City stuff as much, a ton. The Fleshfare stuff, I didn't like a ton as much. I'd give it a 4.5 out of 5. I suggest anybody nowadays to go watch this film because the themes that are present in it and the ones that we've touched on and talked about, I don't think people really got it at the time. And hence, like, some of the poor reviews, I just could not understand. Even when I was young, John, I couldn't understand people giving this like bad reviews. I'm like, I don't get it. Like, this film is tackling so many things that Hollywood typically just does not tackle, which is fine, whatever. There's nothing wrong with a good popcorn movie, but people should stand up and take notice when it's done really well. Especially when they're trying to tackle essentially what I say are the important things. People get caught up in the daily grind of politics and arguing about this and that and this and that, when it's really essentially, it's like 10 big questions that face humanity. And it's like these 10 questions are the only ones that matter. Really, at the end of the day, everything else is just noise. It's the big ones that really matter. And this is what AI tackles.
AI addresses 3 or 4 of those questions, 3 or 4, probably more.
Like, I'm not saying it does all 10 of them, but my point being is, like, there's only like literally like, the number of fingers on your hand. Those are really the only ones you really have to worry yourself about and study, in my opinion. Everything else just kind of clouds your vision. I mean, there's a couple philosophers that have talked about this where, too much information leads to information paralysis. I mean, and this is somewhat of a tangent, but it's the truth. I mean, how many times nowadays you find yourself, you put on your Netflix or whatever, and you're just scrolling through Netflix and you're sitting there and it's like, holy, it's been a half an hour and I still haven't figured out which movie to watch. We never used to have.
We're not in a dark age. As some theoreticians like to complain because people don't read anymore and it's the end of the Gutenberg galaxy and so on and so forth. So therefore we're in a dark age, but we're not. A dark age is a paucity of information. We're in a light age with our light technologies have sent us an information overload. Our problem is too much information in this age. So we don't know what to do with it. So we create game shows, and we create board games like Scrabble and Trivial Pursuit, and we do crossword puzzles. We don't know where do we put all this information. We keep trying to create these little apparatuses of capture to put all the information. And the internet now is the mega medium, my favorite medium of all time. I initially didn't like it. Now I'm a convert. I think it's the greatest medium of all time because it swallows up all the previous media that we've ever had in one place. And it becomes a giant apparatus of semiotic capture. But there's still this problem of information overload. Yep, it's there in all the YouTube videos. There's too damn many of them. As you're scrolling through them, it's just too much. And I've had the same experience on Netflix. Just an hour goes by and you still can't find something to watch that you want.
Anyways, John, why don't you plug some of your works, your webpage, anything? And
let's see. I'm working on. I have a school, an online school that's on the Teachable platform called the John David Ebert School for the study of culture, cosmology, and the arts. Right now, we're reading James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. Pretty soon coming up here, we're going to go back and revisit the works of Plato and the pre-Socratics, and we're going to go through those guys. That'll be coming up in the next couple of weeks. And so there's that. And then I also do astrology readings. For those of you who want astrology, you can contact me at johndavidebert@gmail.com. So I do those. And I'm working on some projects. I've published like 30 books. If you go onto Amazon, there's a whole bunch of them. But I'm simultaneously working on like 5 or more, 6 more. So I'm busy.
Personally, I've read more than a couple of those books, and they're quite good. I mean, I tell people this all the time. Like, you're not going to find somebody who has a lecture series on Rudolf Steiner on YouTube. You're just not going to find it. You might find like little half-an-hour blurbs, and that's the type of stuff that John does. Is he opens up your mind into a different way, a non-mechanical way of looking at the world, right? To get out of this kind of cynical, fact man, scientific, machine-like way of looking at the world. And that's the one thing I'm most grateful for getting into listening to your lectures and reading your books, is you get into all of that where, like, yes, there's the facts and how things come together, but then why do they come together in that way? And this is the problem. The modern Enlightenment type thinking, really, they just try to avoid it. It doesn't do that. And I'm forever grateful for it, because it's opened up my mind to all different types of possibilities in terms of interpreting film, art, philosophy and sent me down all different types of rabbit holes. So I'm forever thankful for that, John.
That's excellent. Yeah, that's why I didn't go through the university. They wouldn't have let me done any of this. So it's paying off. It's definitely paying off. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for having me.